Part 1. The space station called Concordia Prime floated in the empty darkness between three star systems. It was a neutral place, built long ago by species who wanted somewhere safe to talk. No weapons were allowed there. No fighting had ever happened within its walls. For thousands of years, beings from across the galaxy had come to this station to share ideas, make deals, and learn about each other. Every 10 standard cycles, the Galactic Council held its Cultural Integration Summit at Concordia Prime. Representatives from hundreds of species would gather in the great halls to explain their traditions and customs. The goal was simple. If species understood each other better, they would fight less. They would fear each other less. Peace would grow. This cycle's summit was special. For the first time, humans would be presenting. They had only joined the galactic community 3 standard cycles ago when their first faster-than-light ship had stumbled into space. They had been surprised but welcoming. Humans seemed harmless enough. They were soft, slow, and lived very short lives. Their technology was basic. Their bodies were fragile. Most species saw them as friendly but unremarkable. Ambassador of the delegation had been given the task of conducting humanity's cultural interview. This was an honor. They were known as the best listeners in the galaxy. Their bodies were tall and thin, covered in delicate crystalline growths that pulsed with soft light. These crystal fronds were connected directly to their nervous systems. They changed color based on emotions, both their own feelings and the feelings they sensed from others nearby. Fronds glowed a calm blue as the human ambassador entered the interview chamber. The human was a female named Sarah. She was small by galactic standards, with dark hair and warm brown eyes. She smiled as she sat down across from. "Thank you for meeting with me," said. Her voice was pleasant and clear. "I've been looking forward to sharing human culture with the Council." "We are honored to learn about your people," replied. The translator device between them hummed softly, converting their words into each other's languages. "Please, tell us about the traditions of Earth." Nodded and began to speak. She talked about food first. Humans, it seemed, had thousands of different ways to prepare meals. They used heat and cold, salt and sugar, plants and animals. Each region of their planet had developed its own style of cooking. Found this fascinating. They absorbed nutrients through their skin and had never understood the concept of taste. Next, discussed music. Humans made sounds with instruments and their own voices. They organized these sounds into patterns that created emotional responses. Some patterns made them feel happy, others made them sad. Franz flickered with interest. They communicated partly through light patterns, so they understood the idea of expressing feelings through organized signals. Moved on to celebrations. Humans marked the passage of time with special events. They celebrated the anniversary of their births. They gathered together when their planet completed one orbit around their star. They had festivals for planting and harvesting, for religious beliefs, for historical events. "One of our most interesting celebrations is called Halloween," said. Her smile grew wider. "It happens once each year in the season when the nights grow longer." "Please explain this Halloween," said. "Well, it started as a festival about death and the supernatural. Humans dress up in costumes, often trying to look frightening. We decorate our homes to look scary. We put up images of the dead, of monsters, of dark and spooky things." Franz shifted slightly toward yellow. "You attempt to frighten yourselves, on purpose." "Yes, exactly. We find it fun. Children especially enjoy it. They dress up and go to the homes of strangers in their community. They knock on doors and say trick or treat. The strangers give them sweets. The children approach unknown adults and make demands. It's a tradition. Everyone knows about it. The adults prepare by buying candy to give away. It's all very friendly." Process this information. The concept was strange but seemed harmless. Many species had unusual customs around the concept of death. They held elaborate ceremonies when their elders passed. They sang ultrasonic songs for their ancestors. Perhaps this Halloween was similar. And the frightening decorations, continued. These do not traumatize your young. Laughed softly. Most children love being scared as long as they know they're actually safe. It's like a game. The fear is pretend. I see, made a note in their data pad. This is quite unusual to us. The avoid fear. Our neural pathways are very sensitive to negative emotional states. Too much fear can damage our crystal matrices permanently. I'm sorry to hear that, said. Humans are different. We sometimes seek out fear for entertainment. We tell scary stories. We create frightening visual media. We build special attractions designed to startle and terrify visitors. Several other delegates from nearby interview stations had stopped their own conversations. They were listening now. Us respiratory sacs puffed slightly. A sonar pods tilted toward the human ambassador. You may find our relationship with fear confusing, said, but it's deeply rooted in our history. We evolved on a dangerous world. We had to face our fears constantly just to survive. Over time, we developed ways to process and even enjoy controlled fear experiences. Fascinating, said, though their fronds had shifted to a cautious amber. Please continue. What other traditions would you like to share? Thought for a moment. The Council's cultural archives sent me a list of topics they were curious about. They mentioned something about punishment traditions, historical methods of justice and consequence. Ah yes, said. Understanding how a species handles wrongdoing tells us much about their values. Please, explain how humans have traditionally dealt with those who break your social rules. Are you sure? Some of this information can be a bit intense. Franz pulsed with calm confidence. We are scholars. We have studied the customs of hundreds of species. We have learned about the hunting rituals of the territory wars of the blind swimmers, even the parasitic reproduction cycle of the collective. We are prepared for uncomfortable information. All right then, said. She straightened in her seat. Let me start with the basics. The most common punishment in human history has been imprisonment. When a person breaks the law, they are taken from their home and placed in a locked building. They cannot leave. They stay there for a set period of time, sometimes many years, as punishment for what they did. Waited for more. When remained silent, the spoke. This imprisonment, they are kept in the building for how long? It depends on the crime. Minor offenses might result in a few months. Serious crimes could mean years. The worst crimes might lead to imprisonment for the rest of the person's natural life. Their entire life, they are never released. For some crimes, no, never. Franz began to pulse more rapidly, and during this imprisonment, what do? They wait. They have limited space, limited freedom, limited contact with others. Many prisons allow some activities, work, reading, exercise, but the person cannot leave. They are confined. The delegate at the next station had stopped breathing normally. Their respiratory sacs were pumping too fast. Among the forced confinement was the worst thing that could happen to a conscious being. Their species had nearly destroyed itself in ancient times through the practice of forced isolation. They had banned it completely over 200,000 years ago. Even confining criminals for a few days was considered torture beyond measure. Surely this is rare, the called out, forgetting the protocols of the interview. Surely only your most damaged individuals are treated this way. Turn to look at the. Actually, imprisonment is our most common serious punishment. On Earth right now, there are millions of humans in prisons. Millions, this voice was faint. Yes, and this is considered the humane option. Throughout most of our history, we used much harsher methods. The room had gone very quiet. Every delegate within hearing range was now focused on the human ambassador. Franz were cycling through colors rapidly, unable to settle on a single emotional state. Perhaps, said slowly, you could explain these harsher methods, for our historical records, of course. Nodded, of course. Where would you like me to start? No one in the chamber knew it yet, but 17 medical emergency alerts would be triggered within the next standard hour. The Cultural Integration Summit was about to become something no delegate would ever forget, and humanity's reputation in the galaxy was about to change forever. Part 2. Ambassador noticed that her audience had grown. What started as a simple interview had become something larger. Delegates from a dozen species had gathered closer, their own interviews forgotten. They watched her with expressions she could not quite read, but she was a diplomat. She had given difficult presentations before. She continued. Throughout human history, societies developed many ways to punish wrongdoing. The methods varied greatly depending on the time period and location. Some were designed to cause physical pain. Others were meant to shame the person publicly. Many were intended to frighten others into obeying the laws. Crystalline fronds were pooling rapidly between amber and orange. Please give us examples. Well, one common punishment was called flogging. The criminal would be struck repeatedly with a whip or rod. This was used for thousands of years across many cultures. It caused great pain and left permanent scars on the body. A small being with many legs made a clicking sound. Recognized them as their species communicated partly through clicks and partly through chemical signals. The translator struggled with their next words. Your authorities physically damaged the bodies of your own people, as policy. Yes, said. This was considered normal for most of human history. In some places, it still happens today. The clicking intensified. Several near the speaker began releasing stress chemicals. Could not smell them, but other species in the room shifted uncomfortably. Another common punishment was branding, continued. Criminals would be burned with hot metal, leaving a permanent mark on their skin. This marked them forever as someone who had done wrong. Everyone who saw the brand would know what they had done. They could never escape their past, said softly. They were marked for all to see. Exactly, the shame was meant to be permanent. A tall being with silvery skin spoke next. This was one of the oldest species in the council. They had achieved peaceful unification on their 11,000 years ago. Violence was so far in their past that they had to study ancient records to understand it. These punishments you describe, they said, they focus much on causing suffering. Was suffering the goal? Considered the question carefully. Sometimes, yes. There was a belief that punishment should be painful, that criminals deserved to suffer for what they did. Many humans believed that pain would teach lessons that kindness could not. And the others who watched, the public you mentioned. Public punishment was very common. Crowds would gather to watch criminals being hurt or humiliated. It was considered entertainment by some, a warning to others, a way for the community to express their anger. The who had spoken earlier was now being supported by two others of their kind. Their respiratory sacs moved in an irregular pattern. They were on the edge of collapse. Perhaps we should take a rest, suggested. Their fronds were now a deep red color. I can stop if you prefer, said. She genuinely seemed surprised by the reaction. I should mention that I've only discussed the milder punishments so far. Milder? A sonar pulse was high and sharp. The translator rendered it as barely controlled alarm. Yes, I haven't mentioned the execution methods yet. Throughout most of human history, many crimes were punished by death. The methods used to kill criminals were often designed to be slow and painful. No one spoke. The chamber was silent except for this labored breathing. There was hanging, said. The criminal was killed by suspending them from a rope around their neck. Sometimes death was quick. Sometimes it took many minutes. Crowds would watch. There was burning. The criminal was tied to a wooden stake and fire was set around them. They died slowly from the flames and smoke. This was often used for religious crimes. Made a small sound that the translator could not interpret. There was beheading. The head was removed from the body with a blade. This was considered merciful because it was relatively quick. It was often reserved for criminals of high status. The elder had closed their eyes. Their species rarely showed emotion, but their body language had changed. They seemed older somehow. One of the most famous methods was crucifixion, continued. The criminal was attached to a wooden frame, usually by driving metal spikes through their hands and feet. They were then left hanging in public, sometimes for days, until they died from exhaustion, blood loss, or the inability to breathe. It was designed to be the most painful and shameful death possible. A delegate did not recognize made a sound like breaking glass and collapsed. Medical alerts began flashing on several data pads around the room. "Perhaps I should stop," said. She looked around at the gathered beings. Many of them seemed distressed in ways specific to their species. They were releasing so many chemicals that other delegates were moving away from them. They had been carried out by their companions. Crystalline fronds were strobing through every color had seen them display. "No," they said. Their voice was steady despite their obvious discomfort. "We must understand. Please continue. These were ancient practices, yes, from before your species achieved higher civilization." "Some of them were ancient," agreed, "but many were used until quite recently. Hanging was used in some human nations within the last 50 years. Execution by other means still happens on Earth today." "Today," they opened their eyes, "your species still executes criminals." "Some nations do, yes. Methods vary. Some use chemical injections designed to stop the heart. Others use electrical current to damage the body fatally. A few still use older methods like hanging or shooting. And the imprisonment you mentioned before, the locking away for years or lifetimes, that continues as well." "Yes, every nation on Earth uses imprisonment." Notice that medical teams had entered the chamber. They were attending to several delegates who had not handled the information well. A was being given some kind of sonic therapy. Two were carefully regulating light patterns to prevent neural damage. "I should mention one more thing about imprisonment," said. "There is a practice called solitary confinement. This is when a prisoner is kept completely alone in a small room with no contact with other beings, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, sometimes for years." The chamber fell absolutely silent. Studies conducted by human researchers have shown that this practice causes severe psychological damage. Extended solitary confinement can lead to permanent mental illness. The brain begins to fail without contact with others. "And knowing this," whispered, "your species continues to do it." "Some governments do, yes. There is debate about whether it should be allowed, but it still happens. You torture your criminals with isolation, knowing it destroys their minds." Paused. She was beginning to understand that this conversation was not going as expected. There is much debate about what constitutes torture. Different humans have different opinions. The delegate who had been receiving sonic therapy spoke up. Their sonar pulses were unsteady but intelligible. "Surely these are the exceptions. Surely these are the practices of only your most damaged individuals, the worst of your kind." Shook her head slowly. "These practices were developed and implemented by our governments, by our leaders, by ordinary people who believed they were doing the right thing. Most of human history has included punishments like these or worse. They were not hidden. They were not shameful. They were public policy supported by the majority." "Worse," the sonar cracked. "You said these were the milder examples. You said there were worse methods." Hesitated. She looked at the medical teams treating fallen delegates. She looked at whose crystalline fronds were now being manually stabilized by a medical device. She looked at the elder, who met her gaze with something that might have been determination. "Tell us," they said. "We must know." Took a breath. "Are you certain?" "We are the Galactic Council. We have existed for millions of years. We have seen terrible things. We must understand what kind of species has joined our community." "All right," said. "I'll describe just a few more methods. from different periods and places in human history. As she began to speak again, 3 more medical alerts triggered, but no one asked her to stop. The council listened, and slowly their understanding of humanity began to change in ways they had never expected. Part 3. 3 standard cycles passed before the council could meet again. The delegates needed time to recover. They had suffered the worst. 4 of their representatives required extended care to repair the damage to their crystalline neural pathways. Was among the more fortunate ones, released after only 2 cycles of treatment. The emergency session convened in a smaller chamber than usual. Not all species were represented. Some had decided not to attend. They had requested the meeting records instead, preferring to process the information at a distance. Ambassador sat before the assembled delegates. She had been given a translator that could handle multiple species at once. The council mediator, a elder named, addressed the chamber from the center of the room. "We have reviewed the full historical records provided by the human delegation," announced. Ambassador's presentation was accurate. If anything, she was conservative in her descriptions. She omitted many practices that our archivists have found in human historical documents. A murmur passed through the chamber, had omitted things. "The council has been shocked by this information," continued. "Many delegates have questioned whether humanity is ready for membership in our community, whether your species is too dangerous, too cruel, too broken." Waited, she had expected this. In the cycles since the incident, she had prepared herself for possible expulsion from the council. Earth's government had sent her instructions to accept whatever judgment came with grace and dignity. However, said, the council has also noticed something unusual. Ambassador, you presented this information without shame. You did not try to hide your history. You did not make excuses. Why? Stood to address the assembly. Because it happened. Because pretending it didn't happen would not change anything. Humans have learned that hiding from truth makes things worse, not better. You feel shame for these practices? I asked. Many humans do, yes. We study our history to understand how such things could happen. We want to learn from our mistakes. We want to be better than our ancestors. Spoke next. Their fronds were pale but stable. You used a word earlier, evolution. You said humans are still learning to be better than your instincts. What did you mean? Considered the question. Humans evolved on a harsh world. We were prey animals for millions of years before we became dominant. Fear is deeply wired into our biology. For most of our existence, survival depended on killing threats before they could kill us. This made us capable of terrible violence, but it also made us adaptable. It made us creative. It made us social beings who could work together. Your capacity for violence has shaped your civilization, observed. Yes, but so has our capacity for empathy. Humans can imagine the suffering of others. We can feel pain when we see others in pain. This creates conflict within us. We are capable of great cruelty, but we are also capable of recognizing that cruelty as wrong. We can change. The delegate, who had recovered enough to attend, spoke carefully. You say you can change. Show us evidence of this change. Nodded. When I described public torture and execution, I described the past. These practices were common across all human societies for thousands of years. They were considered normal and necessary. Today, most human nations have abandoned them completely. The majority of humans now believe that torture is wrong. This is a massive shift in moral understanding, and it happened in less than 300 years. Slavery was once legal and accepted in many human cultures. People were treated as property to be bought and sold. Today, slavery is illegal everywhere on Earth. All major human institutions condemn it. This change happened in about 200 years. Human women were once considered property of their fathers and husbands. They could not vote, own property, or make their own choices. Today, women have equal rights under law in most human nations. This change happened in less than 150 years. The chamber was quiet. The delegates were processing this information differently than they had processed the darker revelations. Each generation of humans examines the beliefs of their ancestors, said. Often they find those beliefs wrong. They make changes. They push for better treatment of all beings. The changes are slow and imperfect. There are setbacks. Some humans resist progress, but the overall direction has been toward less cruelty, more empathy, more justice. Even now, humans debate our remaining cruel practices. Many humans want to abolish the death penalty completely. Many want to end solitary confinement. Many work to reform our prison systems to focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment. We do not agree on everything, but we are always arguing about how to be better. Leaned forward slightly. You describe a species in constant moral conflict with itself. Yes, that is exactly what we are. Humans contain both terrible darkness and remarkable light. We are always fighting between these parts of ourselves. Sometimes the darkness wins. Sometimes the light does, but we never stop fighting. A small being with iridescent wings spoke, did not recognize the species. Other species in this council reached peaceful stability long ago. We do not have this internal conflict. We do not have this darkness within us. I understand, said. Many of your species evolved differently. You did not face the same pressures we did. You do not carry the same violent instincts. In some ways, you are more fortunate than humans. But consider this, continued. Humans have survived ice ages, pandemics, wars, famines, and disasters of every kind. We have survived because our fear made us cautious. We have survived because our violence allowed us to defend ourselves. And we have progressed because our empathy eventually caught up with our power. We are a species that has looked at its own capacity for evil, recognized it clearly, and chosen to fight against it. This is not comfortable, it is not peaceful, but it has made us who we are. We know what we are capable of. We carry that knowledge as a warning. It makes us work harder to be better. Was silent for a long moment. Then they spoke again. The Council has a proposal for humanity. Waited. We have discussed your species extensively. Some delegates believe humanity is too dangerous to remain in the Council. Your history suggests a capacity for violence that could threaten the stability of our community. But others have noted something remarkable. You have not hidden your darkness. You have examined it honestly. You have shared it openly, even knowing how it might affect our view of you. This suggests a maturity that many species never achieve. The Council therefore proposes to add humanity to the Ethics Review Board. Blinked the Ethics Review Board. Yes, this board examines difficult moral questions that arise in our community. Questions about justice, about punishment, about how to handle wrongdoing across species with different values. Your species has struggled with these questions more than any other we have encountered. You have made terrible mistakes, but you have also learned from those mistakes in ways that might benefit us all. Spoke again. When you described solitary confinement, I was horrified, but I was also impressed. Your scientists studied its effects. Your people debated whether it should continue. You held yourselves accountable for practices that had existed for generations. Many species would simply accept tradition. Humans question tradition. You ask whether old ways are still good ways, I added. You demand evidence. You change when evidence shows you are wrong. This is valuable. Felt something unexpected, something like hope. You're saying that our flawed history qualifies us to help others with difficult moral questions. We are saying that a species which has faced its own evil and chosen to fight against it has perspective that the rest of us lack, said. We achieved peaceful stability by evolving without the capacity for great violence. You achieved your current state by having that capacity and learning to control it. Both paths have value, but your path may be more useful when dealing with species that also struggle with internal conflict. The vote was taken. Every delegate present voted to accept the proposal. Humanity would join the Ethics Review Board. After the session ended, approached, their fronds glowed a gentle purple that the translator identified as something like cautious respect. "I must ask you something," said. "When you described those terrible practices, you seemed almost casual. You were not distressed the way we were. How can you speak of such things so calmly?" Thought about the question carefully. Perhaps because we live with this knowledge every day. Every human knows what humans are capable of. We learn about our history as children. We see evidence of cruelty in our news, our stories, our memories. It is always with us. We cannot afford to be paralyzed by it. Instead, we carry it and try to do better. "That is a heavy burden," said. "Yes, but it is ours, and we carry it because we must, because forgetting would be worse." Franz shifted through several colors before settling on something the translator could not identify. Then they reached out and touched shoulder briefly with one delicate crystalline tendril. "Welcome to the council," said. "I think we have much to learn from each other." Smiled, "I hope so. After all, learning is how we became what we are. It's how we'll become what we need to be." Humanity had been accepted not despite their dark history, but because they had survived it. They had looked at their own worst nature and chosen to be better. And in a galaxy full of species who had never faced such a test, that choice made humans something rare and valuable indeed. The real work was just beginning.